launching a rocket. Kim, are we recording yet?
We are recording.
Okay. Can you back up? You're going to back up to the first slide.
Yes.
Good morning, everybody. It's my pleasure to welcome all of us to the November 8th Preparation and Entry Subcommittee meeting. It's good to see folks. We've got a good turnout. So looking forward to a great conversation this morning. You've received the agenda, and you also received a copy of the minutes from the October 20 meeting. If you've had a chance to review those, I can have a motion to approve.
So move.
I think that was Phil. Second?
This is Christina. I'll second it.
Thank you, Christine. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you. The minutes are approved. So I want to take just a second and connect us back through the last meeting, through the meeting of the co-chairs that we had a few days ago into today's meeting. So one of the critical points in the last meeting was a discussion of moving from conversations that were built primarily around credentials, as we were looking at the different pathways, into conversations that are based more on competencies. How do we understand the practice being engaged in the different levels of licensure that we have been unpacking? And so as Hank and I talk with the folks at DPI about how to continue to move that conversation about competencies and what the framing constructs for the licensure levels might look like, how could we frame that in a way that we were using competencies as the driver, but we were also having a conversation that had some kind of parameters or framework around it. So one of the points that came up late in the last subcommittee meeting, and we talked about, Hank and I talked about it as co-chairs, is using in-task as common language. It's not so much using the standards as they're now set and that's what we're doing, and we don't need to construct or create any additional language. Is that in-task, because it is so core to so many components of professional competency and how we define them, gives us common language. It gives us a frame of reference from which we can work as a subcommittee to start to identify what those competencies we would expect at each one of the license levels would be. So we came to that conclusion in the co-chair meeting in preparation for this meeting. A second piece of that was the language that we've been talking about that we would develop would come from 2 points of departure. One is evidence of practice. Do we see the practices? Do we see the pedagogical skills and abilities in an apprentice or a license 1, license 2, license 3 that we would expect to see for a person to hold that license? And then do we see that practice translating into evidence of impact on learners? Are we seeing the skills, abilities, dispositions, and knowledge of the teacher impacting learners, hopefully in a positive way? And so in an effort to try to say this in a simple way, we talked about this sentence that you see there in the 4th bullet, that a person who enters the profession with license X, apprentice 1, 2, 3, has exhibited evidence of competency at levels of performance, levels of competency, using the in-task language as a way to frame what that might look like. We also discussed the relationship between a person who is identified at the apprentice licensure level and a person who is identified as an intern and an EPP, and how do we situate that status of an intern? Going back to the last meeting, that emerged from conversations about the fact that an intern and an EPP has achieved a level of practice that positions them to be approved to go into an internship. And because that level of practice likely was equivalent to or exceeded levels of practice that we might see with the apprentice, license 1 and license 2, how would we situate that intern framing in the pathways? The language that we talked about in the preparation in the co-chair meeting was apprentice clinical residency. So can we think about the relationship between a person who's an apprentice, who's a intern, particularly in an undergraduate program, doesn't have a bachelor's degree yet, how we would give them a parallel designation in the pathways that would respect the knowledge, skills, and dispositions that they have achieved as an intern. Hank, I think I got the highlights of what we talked about.
Yeah, I think you hit it round the head there.
So I'm going to turn it over to Hank. Our conversation today is really about building on the work that we did in the last meeting with the additional resource of the InTAS language. So Hank, I think at this point, I'm going to turn it over to you to set us up for the breakouts.
All right, do it. Can I share my screen, Kim?
Sure thing.
So one of the things that we put together after our last co-chairs meeting, just another way to look at the licensure levels. Like Van said, we were trying to make sure we had some kind of difference between an apprentice who was just coming out with a 2-year degree or 60 hours and that of a clinical resident, without stepping on the fact that license 1 and 2 are entry points for the bachelor's degree, so that we could maybe compensate the clinical resident at a level above the apprentice, but still not put them in one of those licensure buckets where a bachelor is required. With the idea being that you would jump right from clinical residency to license 3 by the end of your experience. The other thing we talked about is that at license 3, if we're using the InTAS standards, the 10 standards and the 4 domains, that we would want a certain level of proficiency across all of those standards by the time that you stepped into a license 3. So by the time that you either completed your EPP program or that you completed some other track towards that license 3 across these particular tracks. So the idea for today, well, one other thing that we talked about, which I think is important, is that second row of the support provided. So I think we all agreed apprentice is not the teacher of record, and we also put clinical resident as not the teacher of record, but that there would be a higher expectation of their engagement in the classroom as a teacher as compared to what the apprentice would be expected. License 1, and these are all just, holding places right now, something to start with, that the teacher of record for license 1, like our current residency, except that they would have in-classroom mentoring 50% of the time. Now that percentage can change, of course, just a starting place. License 2, if you've gotten to this level of competency, then you would still have in-classroom mentoring 25% of the time. And then by the time you're a license 3 teacher, you step in like a new teacher in the BT program and the same support and mentoring that the district would provide for any new teacher at that point. We thought we'd use this maybe as a framework to start with. First of all, maybe to look at the language in each one of these buckets and make sure that we feel good about that. And then also to start looking at those InTAS standards, and we all had a copy of that from what Kim sent out earlier, to start thinking about how those competencies and standards might live across these areas. So we're understanding that by the time we get to license 4, we're proficient in every one of the standards and also showing some kind of impact through impact data at that point. So we're thinking from license 3 down for this piece of the work right now. Is that pretty, am I on target there, Van?
I think so.
Okay. Kim, if you want to go back to your share now, that would be great. I just lost my. Sorry, everybody, I just lost my screen. There it goes.
Hank and Van, this is Randy. Could I ask a
Sure.
quick question just to help orient me on this? What I'm hearing from you all is that the exercise we're going to engage in now is to sort of backwards map the standards onto our current levels and considering the outcomes that are there. For example, do you have a degree? Don't you? That type of thing. Which is the reverse order of how one would typically do this, right? Where you set the competencies first and then align the outcomes to those competencies. Am I understanding that right, though, that we're basically looking to backwards map the standards onto these categories that we've already designated?
I get, to some degree with the understanding that the INTAS standards have already got competencies attached to them and levels for those competencies actually that we could draw from as just a common starting place. The other option is to develop our own standards, of course, and levels of competency, but we thought it might be this would give us a common language to start from, to at least start dropping some things in buckets with, a nationally validated group of standards and competencies that are already out there for us. That doesn't mean that we'll stick with this all the way through, obviously, but it would at least give us a place to start.
Yeah, Randy, I also think the process is probably, it was when we had the conversation, Hank and I and the DPI folks, it was that the place where we seem to have the most explicit understanding now is with what we call license 3 in the model. We understand how a competency-based set of standards, like INTAS, sit somewhere like license 3, where the person is then ultimately moving toward license 4. Where I doubt it will be as clean. So we thought when we were backward mapping at that point, okay, if this is sort of a threshold, what does it look like moving backwards? It could easily start on the front end. And what are the minimum competencies we would expect to see, for example, with an apprentice? My hunch is the conversation that's about to play out will sort of populate this in multiple places at the same time. But the one, just to repeat the point, and this came out of the last subcommittee meeting, there seems to be a broader understanding of the application of competencies in what we currently call license 3 than any of the other license levels. And then we, as Hank said, we start to frame language and then we go back, we circle back and adjust as we go.
Yeah. Thank you both. That's helpful. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Randy.
So-
The next, go ahead, Kimberly.
It's Christina. So just
Christina.
to clarify, so the INTAS standards don't, there's no continuum there. The INTAS standards state basically what the proficient expectation is. So what you're really asking us to do then is to say, like, which of those standards or which components of the standards we're expecting proficiency in at each of those licensure levels, as opposed to saying what level of competency we're expecting. Is that correct?
I think that is part of it, with the thought that the level of competency would be the next part of the work once we were agreed on things. Yeah. I think that's where we start.
Yeah, and also, Christina, if you think about all 10 being present at license 3, the way we think about an EPP, is at license 1, is there a subset that we would expect to see? We wouldn't expect all 10. And even with the subset, there are levels of performance on that subset that we would not expect to see in license 1 that we would expect to see by the time they get to license 3 or license 4. So yeah, I think it's both, and it's which competencies, if not all, and what levels of performance at the different licensure levels.
Thank you.
I think-
I think that makes sense to me.
I'm sure we'll go all over the place once we get in our breakout groups. But the other thing that's nice within task, although we don't need to get into this today necessarily, but they do set up progressions of performance across each standard, which may give us some language to draw from in terms of what those competency levels look like or where they should live, which is nice. You can go ahead, Kim.
Hank, sorry,
Yes.
Christina again. Can you
Uh-huh.
direct me to where that language is? Because I'm
Sure, I'm going to put it in the chat right now. So if you go to that PDF and then pull down to where, let's see, like I'm sitting on page 17 right now, 18.
Yeah, Hank, while you're doing that, back to Randy's question, I'm pulling up things from memory from previous conversations. If there seems, and we believe there is, if there seems to be confirmation that in license 3, we have the most comprehensive application of competency language, such as what is in task, and the data from the impact of people who come through that route into licensure is the most positive data in terms of impact on student learning, that was sort of where we put the flag and said, now how do we work forwards into license 4, 5, and 6 and backwards into license 2, 1, and apprentice, because that seems to be where we have the most confidence about both the application of the competencies and the evidence that leads to a positive impact. So to your point, it isn't so much to say we wouldn't go back, for example, to apprentice as much as it was, that was where we had some levels of confidence about what we know now about practice. I hope that makes sense.
This is Megan. May I ask a question?
Sure.
For the in-test standards, are we to assume that all of these apply to level 3, or should we actually assume that all of these really apply to level 4? And there may be some new teachers that come in at level 3 that still would not completely be able to prove full competency in each.
I get, in my mind, it depends on where we set the competencies in these standards. So there would be a proficient level of competency across the 10 standards. And then the thought would be that would expand or intensify as you got the 4 and 4 plus, both with the impact data that the state would provide once we decide what that's going to be. But also, when you're looking at the in-test standards and the progression of performance, it moves more towards leadership by that third bucket that they have, the third level, which some of that may live better in license 4 and the 4 plus areas than it would at the level 3 area, where we're looking for just a certain proficiency across all of these 10 standards, kind of like our current North Carolina standards. And again, this is really a starting place. I know there's another committee looking at what these competencies ought to be and perhaps new standards for the state, but this seemed like the easiest place to start so that we would have something to take back as to what we're thinking in terms of levels of competency.
I'm just going to add, if we're assuming level 3 is equivalent to what currently is, coming out of a fully prepared admin EPP, in order to receive accreditation from, say, CAPE, we have to demonstrate that our candidates are proficient in all of the in-test standards. So if we're assuming that level 3 would be equivalent to that level of proficiency, then I think we can say that, yes, we would expect proficiency across all 10 standards for a level 3. But that's assuming that we're in agreement about what level 3 represents, right?
Right. Right, and I guess that would be a great conversation in our breakout groups. Is level 3 that particular level, or is there something different in terms of the competency levels for that one? But I agree with you that in order for us to stay accredited, we have to show that. So that might be a non-issue.
Yeah, Hank, we might also add, when we set up the structure for the meeting, we had a feeling that when we come out of the breakout groups, we might need more time for sort of unpacking what happened in the breakout groups than we have in the past. And so when we do the breakout groups, we come back out, we've got more time to have this conversation across all the participants in today's meeting. So we tried to make sure we didn't feel rushed in the conversation.
Right. Go ahead and move ahead, Ken. So we've got 30 minutes for a breakout, and we'll look across. I believe we decided just to look across all of the levels to talk as a group, as opposed to giving each group a particular level. Is that correct, Van? Am I remembering that right?
Yes.
Okay. And you'll have a copy of that matrix in your folder that we can work on. So we just need a facilitator and a note taker for each session when you get out, like we have in the past. And please try to record everything on the Word document, whoever is your note taker, so that we can gather all the information and synthesize it for the next time we come together. So I think at this point, we're ready to break out and see what we come up with as this great group here.
Let me just readjust the groups a little bit. We've had 1 or 2 people leave the meeting. It'll probably be around 4 groups.
Okay.
While Kim's doing that, I just want to give a shout out. It's great to see the committee get to this phase, and I know it's an imperfect science, but just really exciting work. So thank you.
Thanks, Randy. We appreciate everybody's input. It's been some hard work over the last few months.
Yeah, it's felt a little bit like Jackson Pollock art so far. We're getting there.
Okay, we're about ready to go. There's 4 groups, and there's either 3 or 4 people in your group. And the breakout session is for 30 minutes.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure. Hi there. Who's on the phone?
Hey Kim, it's Laura. I'm only hearing like every other word, so I'm trying to switch to my phone. Can you put me back in group 4?
What with your phone? Have your phone? But
Yeah.
see, your phone's not listed for me to be able to do that.
Okay.
Sorry
You're
about
not.
that.
Okay. It's okay. It's okay. Do you know how
Can
to do
you
closed
join by phone
caption?
through WebEx?
Hold on just a second.
Okay.
Kim, do you know how to do closed caption within the breakout groups? I could do it in the main session, but I'm not able to do it in this one.
Right. I haven't actually seen that capability.
Okay. All right. Well, I will just muddle through and put what I can in the chat. Yeah, the connectivity is not fabulous on my end today.
Okay. There is a way. Do you have WebEx on your phone? Because if you join through your phone and mute your computer and listen through your phone, then I can add your phone to the group and
Okay,
have
let
you
me try
both
that.
of you in there.
Okay, let me try that, Kim.
Okay. Sure.
So much.
Sure.
Hi, Kim and Tom.
Hi, Olivia. I'm going to add you to a breakout session. We still have about 17 minutes in it.
Oh my, okay. That's good.
Kim, it's Diana Lease. I joined late. Are you there?
Hi, Diana. Everybody has about 2 minutes in the breakout session, so I'm not sure it's worth you going in there. Can you hear me?
Kim?
Diana, can you hear me?
I am not able to hear you. Let me play around and see what I need to do.
Okay.
Okay. Kim, I think I got my audio set up. I apologize.
Oh, no problem.
How
So
you
we have
doing?
about a minute and a half left of breakout sessions.
Okay. All right. Well, then I will just hang out and catch up. Did I miss anything big from the first part?
So they're looking at in-task standards
Okay.
and following those along the lines of competencies instead of skills for especially licenses 2 and 3 and seeing where those belong there.
Mhm.
So there was a little bit discussion around that. I'm sure that you'll get more details as everybody comes out of their breakout sessions and
Okay.
what they end up discussing during that. But
Okay.
that's kind of the gist of it.
Okay. So they'll do
Yeah.
a report out like we've done in other.
Yes, and actually it might even be more in depth this time around because we have a little more time and we're not doing another breakout session.
Okay. Perfect. All right. Good time for me
Sure.
to slide on in. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Well, that wasn't long enough at all. The way it usually is. But I'm sure we've got lots of good stuff to share out. Kim, I asked you to help out. If you can tell me who's in group 1, maybe we can start with them to start sharing out some. And I think, Van, I think it's fair that as group share, if other people want to go ahead and ask questions to that group or clarifications, we can do that so we don't lose the thread.
Yep. And we have plenty of time, he says, at 10 o'clock.
That's great.
Yes, so group 1 is Aaron Horn, Lydia Hedrick, and Olivia Oxendine, and Randy Penfield.
All right. One of you like to share out for us, please?
This is Lydia. I'm going to start for our group because Aaron's in between 2 different meetings. And then my group is going to jump in. This is my first experience with in-task standards, so just warning you, I guess. Really, we felt like using the progressions of the in-task standards that staff would need to have some level of competency across all INTAS standards as the teacher of record under license 1. And so when we look at the progressions, there seems to be sort of a rubric where there's like a level 1, level 2, level 3, specifically for the knowledge area. So we would want them to have, at least level 1 ability there, and then progressing into license level 2, using the progression document, they would need to meet a level 2 by the end of that year in order to progress to level 3. And then on level 3, we would want them to be competent in all INTAS standards, similar to what is required of PAPE accreditation for institutions. And so really leaving that license level 3 at the end of that year being a level 3 in that progression rubric.
So, again, just for clarification, so if you're thinking about in terms of entry points, if you're going to be a licensed 3 teacher, then we are saying that you've met proficiency in all 10 standards before you could enter in a license 3.
No, at the end of license 3, so to exit it. So you would have that 3rd year to meet those standards.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from the rest of the group on group 1's input?
Hank, can I ask a question?
Yeah, of course.
Lydia, how confident, and I don't mean, how much confidence did your folks have in the progression concept that you looked at? Is it something you felt good about? Something you felt, yeah, it looks like it could work, but we'll see?
Well, this is my first time looking at the INTAS standards. Only one member of our group was really familiar with them. So I think to be able to answer that effectively, I'd really have to spend more time in the INTAS standards. Looks like Erin is off. Erin's the one that had the most experience with those standards. So we were really relying on her pretty heavily within our group. As we look across that progression, it does seem to be, that first level 1 is a baseline, and then level 2 is everything from level 1 and additional items. So it made sense to us to utilize that as far as aligning the progressions with the licensure levels. But for me to say like, oh, yep, 100%, I know that we can make that happen, I'd have to really spend some time digging into each of the different standards.
Yeah. Thank you.
And then in group 2 is Hank, Maya, and Cheryl.
Hi, this is Maya. I'm going to share for our group, and Hank and Cheryl, feel free to chime in. Our ideas mapped on fairly well with that, except I think we were envisioning, at license level 3, to become a license level 3 teacher, they'd be expected to meet all 10 INTAS standards. And given the way that we've been conceptualizing leadership in levels 4+, we need to be creative in how we demonstrate evidence of leadership to accreditors at licensure level 3, given the 9th INTAS standard, or I think 10th INTAS standard related to that. At license level 2, we were thinking that they should show the progression of levels 1 to 2 on INTAS. And so there should be some evidence that they're actually applying classroom instructional planning and classroom management. And then at license level 1, really to focus on the pain points to help teachers survive and be effective in the classroom should be the focus of the boot camp. So they should show some competency here, thinking more about applied understanding of knowledge acquisition related to things like instructional planning and classroom management. And maybe with their mentor teacher, they're actually focusing at this point on learning how to apply those skills. And then we had a conversation related to the apprenticeship, whether or not we should just be looking at credentials or also be thinking about competencies as an entry point for this level. I don't think we reached any point of agreement, but I think it's a conversation to have. And I'll pass it to Hank or Cheryl if you have anything to add.
I think Cheryl made a great point. We were struggling kind of with licensure one and thinking about somebody that's walking straight in off the streets like they do for our residency programs right now, and thinking, are we looking for a certain level of competency across all 10 of those standards to jump into the classroom at that point? Or is there a subset of competencies that we know from experience have been pain points, as Cheryl called them, like instructional planning and some long-term planning, some classroom management strategies that could be done in something like TFA's boot camp prior to their start as a teacher of record with 50% mentoring help. So I think one was a little bit difficult. And then when we thought back to clinical resident, it seems, I'll say for me, it seemed to me that they ought to be somewhere near the same level of competency as our licensed 2 folks, because that would be the natural progression, that they would have enough experience and background in the field that they would be able to take on some of those competencies, just not as the teacher of record. I think that's kind of where we got to. Any questions for this group? Comments, concerns? Okay, Kim, how about group 3?
Group 3 is Christina, Van, and Megan.
So we didn't actually discuss this, but so I'll just jump into. We had a very similar conversation to what's already been. I guess we arrived at a very similar conclusion to what's already been described. I think in alignment with group 2, we felt that all 10 standards, competency on all 10 standards at the learning progression level 3 would be the entry point for license 3. And we discussed using those learning progressions from in task, for license 1 would be level 1, progression level 1, license 2, progression level 2 across all 10. And I guess one thing that we talked about that hasn't been mentioned is in license 1, replacing some of those more traditional things that are currently listed in this document, such as the major 24 hours of coursework, practice 2 passing scores, eliminating that and using the competency of that level 1 learning progression from the in-task standards in place of those more traditional measures that we're kind of trying to get away from. So I think that was the main thing that we talked about that was maybe different than what's already been said, but I think we're kind of all coming together, seems like. Dan, Megan, did you have anything to add?
I was going to ask Megan if you wouldn't mind summarizing what you said about the relationship between practice at license 3 and practice at license 4, and what you sometimes see as the disconnect.
Sure. I just brought up the point that in interviewing a lot of K-12 and higher ed folks over the years, and looking at effectiveness and evaluations and things like that, there seems to be a disconnect, and I think it exists in North Carolina, around descriptions of eval rubrics. And when you're talking about developing, proficient, mastery, all those kind of descriptor words that are used in eval rubrics at those different levels, that they're not exactly aligned for from the K-12 sort of definition standpoint and the higher ed definition standpoint. And those need to be aligned. I think if the goal is still to kind of try and have some sort of universal rubric that applies consistently across preparation and into practice, we're not there yet, and that needs to be kind of inspected closely and addressed clearly.
Thank you.
Good points. Any other questions or comments for group 3?
Then group 4 is Andrew, Jennifer, and Laura.
Morning, everybody. So our group talked about in license 2 area, and I have it posted on my sheet there if you guys want to pull that up. There was some discussion initially around some of the challenges associated with this. And I thought this was an interesting perspective from Jennifer's take, was the gaps that could arise from the residency route versus the traditional route, insofar as the EPPs are taking on someone that has a defined content competency, right? Like in terms of, I studied history, so I'm gonna come in and be a residency teacher. But we also know that the reality in the field is that in many cases there's some gaps in some of that content. So if the EPPs are focused on the pedagogy side for residency folks, who's going to pick up the slack associated with gaps in knowledge, given that there's essentially very little time for EPPs to navigate content areas for residency. So I thought that was a really interesting point to share. And then in terms of dividing up the various standards for license 2, there was a thought that all of standard 1 needs to be in place for license 2. Pieces of standard 6, specifically A, B, D, I, J, K, and P. And then a decent handle on standard 7, specifically standard 7A through M. And standard 8, instructional strategies. So some thinking around that needed to be largely in place for license 2. And then license 3 would then be more of those in-task standards that are contingent on having a little more time on task and taking a little bit more of experience into play. And that would be standards 2, 3, 4, 5, the other pieces, the remaining pieces of standard 6, the remaining pieces of standard 7, and 9 and 10. And then there was also one other thought I feel like it would be worth sharing, is the this idea of some of these things, like specifically in the area of standard 10. And there's going to be some areas where the LEA has to play ball here, and not necessarily the EPP. So, how do we engage the LEAs in a meaningful way regarding shaping some of those expectations, as well as evaluating some of those expectations out in the field. So that was group 4.
Great, thank you. Any questions for group 4? It's an interesting way to maybe break up some of the standards as opposed to looking at every one across. It's different. Well, it sounds like there's a lot of common thinking around this, which is great. I feel like we're making it somewhere right now, even if these aren't the standards we ultimately go to. And Megan, yes, I think you're right on target that we have talked about a common rubric that goes across all these levels, so that there is connection into the field and back to apprenticeship at some point. I am still interested, if you were backwards mapping this, as Randy said in the beginning, I'm curious to the group, at what do we believe that somebody that's coming in as an apprentice should have a certain level of competency in any or all of the standards in task? Or is that just a starting place that's credentialed at that point, based on credentials?
For our group 1, really the conversation was that because in license 1, they were going to be the teacher of record, that's when they really needed to have that. Whereas previously, with the apprentice and the clinical resident, that's going to look a little bit different, their role in the classroom. So we felt like we could be a little more flexible with that in those license areas.
were you thinking that there would still be a certain set of competencies and levels of competencies in that level to enter at that point, specifically the apprenticeship? So we know the clinical resident's going to come in with basically all of their coursework and clinical experience except for the internship done. So that they're going to have a lot more coming in. But for just an apprentice who's finished an associate's, and it could have been an associate's of arts, just your general one, with no ed at all part of it.
So I'm not answering for the group at this point. This is a personal answer. It seemed like in our previous discussions as a group that the apprentice was really an opportunity for somebody to try on public education. So if that's the way that we're going to look at it, then I don't think that we can make those requirements. Because they won't have that experience necessarily to be able to fulfill those requirements.
I took part in a portion of the one discussions. This is Olivia Oxendine. The question that I would put on the table is what would be the expectations of the school administrator of that individual? I think that has implications for contracts, that has implications for designing, developing, and getting state board policy around job description. So I'm coming at this more from the standpoint of the day-to-day expectations of parents, not necessarily parents, but the school administrator, the other teachers, the mentors, the local board of education, and of course, clear communication to parents and families about the role of this individual.
I just wanted to point out, because I was in group 4 with Andrew, that I think one of the things we really have to think about if we're looking at the standards or creating new standards is who's going to be responsible, just like Olivia said, for managing and making sure that the candidate meets the standard. Because if they're not under the umbrella of the EPP at one of those times, then we have to really be thinking about what is the EPP's responsibility, and then what is the LEA and the administrator responsibility for the candidate's training and ability to move through the standards, however our expectation turns out to be.
That's an excellent point. It speaks to the need for a clear MOU.
I think it's also possible we might see some new roles come out of this work. So there would be particularly advanced teacher roles or professional appointments where their primary responsibility is this kind of space. How are they helping to provide that? New teacher support coach, that concept might be a way to think about it, but there are people whose primary professional responsibility is supporting educators in these transitions.
Because I think right now with residency, I don't know how other people are handling it, and I'm actually out on medical leave right now, but we have a class, our students take two classes where they're coached by a university supervisor, where the supervisor is watching them teach and helping them with lesson plans. And that's something we really decided to add into our program. Sorry. But I don't know how other universities are handling it. And we do have an issue with that person in communication with the LEA administration. You know what I mean? Like, she's very outgoing and really tries to make those connections, but it's not like they're coming to us at all. So I don't think that's been clearly defined with these residency candidates, how we're going to, handle them. We're trying to figure it out as we're going along. So I think there are a lot of things that need to be hammered out with that.
Hank, could I build on something that, I'm sorry, Lydia.
Go ahead, Randy.
Oh, I was just going to build on something. I think it was that Olivia mentioned. If we're thinking about something at the apprentice level, that competencies may not be so much pedagogical in nature. They may be things like dispositional, for example, and not that doesn't also play a role at the other levels. But I would just encourage us as we're thinking about the competencies that they may look a little bit different at some of the other levels, but nonetheless, they're still there and important for us to consider.
I think that's a great point, Randy. Thank you for making sure we don't lose track of that piece of it. Other thoughts?
I mean, I think just thinking about the evaluation component, it's going to have to look different for somebody that's an apprentice and not in an educator preparation program and not held to the same standards. I don't see how we would put them on the same evaluation tool as somebody on a license 1, 2, or 3. Because it does feel like the job description would be different.
This is Olivia just saying ditto capital letters to your point. The job description must be different. And the expectations will drive that.
And is the assumption that if you took the teacher assistant job description, that there would be additions to that in terms of the amount of responsibility, and perhaps that's a way that we cook in some competencies to the apprentice level as opposed to just a TA? Or is it just that you've decided you're going into teaching and you've committed to an EPP program at that point, and that gets you in the door as an apprentice?
I think that's a good starting point. I don't want to be the only one commenting, but I do think that looking at that as a point of departure around a job description, adding those dispositions and anything, any other markers of ability would be a good place to begin.
I think I don't mean for this to sound as definitive as it's going to sound, but through these conversations, this process, we've talked about you can't be in a license forever. So right now, apprentice is defined as a part of the pathway. If we were to make a determination that you could be an apprentice and that's a new job description, you can hold that semi-permanently, then it either means we have to adjust the pathway or we have to move that kind of appointment outside the pathway, because I've assumed from the beginning, if you were an apprentice, you were beginning the pathway of becoming a teacher. You were ultimately going to end up in license 4, versus this is sounding more like it's a different kind of appointment, teaching assistant for.
I agree with you. And maybe the discussion around a job description is where it gets murky. But the word apprentice means just that. You're there for a period of time and then you move on to maybe journeyman or something. And a very experienced master teacher. But yeah, I just think maybe not the word job description, but there's got to be some document that lays out what this person is going to be doing. It's going to be important from the standpoint of public relations and building, developing ownership around this concept. The communication piece is going to be huge.
That is a great comment. Would you see them being in the progression, that there's an expectation of a level of performance that gets framed using the in-task language?
Yes. There's got to be some transitional, some elements in this around abilities, competencies, movement forward that lets everyone know that this is not a permanent job forever, that you're moving on to some level, the next stage of expertise.
Yeah, I totally agree. The only reason I said something about job description is if we were looking at what those competencies may be that are connected, that we could look at what TAs are currently asked to do, map those to the competencies, and then maybe raise it a level in terms of what we're expecting from these apprentices as opposed to what a TA is expected to do. My question returns though, is there a certain level of competency that's required in some or any of the INTAS standards that is required to get you in the door as an apprentice? So you have to have already acquired those. Or is apprentice a place where you start working on those so that you can eventually move up?
This is Megan. If I may, just to offer a personal viewpoint, my own viewpoint, not speaking for any other person or group, but if the apprenticeship role really is to be a pipeline, a new role to build the pipeline for folks who are interested in learning about teaching and maybe becoming a teacher, I would think that we would be quite light on the list of requirements coming in so that it really truly is open to those who wish to explore and to do so in a serious fashion. I think you only really need to have some sort of degree of checkpoint in making sure that they are serious, that they're not just doing it to earn a small paycheck. And they could be going and doing that in any other sort of job. Other than that, I would think we would be really more focused on the supervisor aspect of someone, helping the apprentice, making sure that they are actually growing in skills, becoming even more interested in the profession, wanting to enter, to grow enough to become an EPP enrollee, and then a clinical resident, and then hopefully bump all the way up to a license 3 would be the goal. So I would think the focus really should be on more how an apprentice is supported and what they're coming out of an apprenticeship with than the requirements on the front end, if it really is a pipeline interest kind of addition to the model.
Dr. Dempsey, this is Tom Tomberlin. May I, or Dr. Weddington, may I make a comment to that?
Of course.
Thank you. So in large part, I don't disagree with what Megan just said, but I think given the fact that we are not, I think one of the things that has been established by this group is that we are not creating the apprentice role to the exclusion of the current TA model. So TAs can continue to be TAs. And so if there isn't some type of requirement or manifestation that this person is doing something or has some skill above and beyond what our current TAs would have, then why wouldn't a TA just sign up for an apprentice for those couple years so they get paid more and then just drop back to the classified position later? I think there has to be some kind of requirement there that distinguishes this role from a TA. And I'm not trying to make it overly restrictive. I'm just concerned that we don't want every TA out there to say, well, yeah, let me do that for 2-3 years, however long you give them. I'm not going to move forward, but I'll just go back to being a classified TA when my time's done.
I totally agree with Tom, and I did not mean to confuse it at all. I think that there should be light requirements, and definitely a requirement that they are in school, trying, pursuing a degree. But I don't personally, and I know this might not be the popular opinion, and you guys can just take it with a grain of salt because it's my own thought. I don't personally think requiring enrollment in an EPP to start an apprenticeship is necessarily valid. They may be pursuing a degree in, mathematics or something else that could be beneficial as a teacher, and then choose during the apprenticeship to enroll in an EPP. And just me personally, I think that would be a success as someone who is the apprenticeship role has inspired them to become a teacher and that they become enrolled in an EPP program, you know, during their first year, after their first year of the apprenticeship.
Yeah, Megan, I think as long as we can do that, and if we're going to live in the framework provided by InTask, there are baseline expectations. And so if someone who's a math major at UNCW signs on to be an apprentice, we still have expectations about their practice when they're in that role. And they could be minimal. I mean, it could be basic, and they're probably going to be primarily dispositional, to go back to something Randy said a few minutes ago. But if they're not, if we can't situate them in that continuum, then it seems to me they're outside the pathway, and you got to be inside the pathway to be in this structure that we're talking about with the subcommittee. Well, I guess in different kind of language, I wouldn't want to see the apprentice become a stick your toe in the water kind of experience. If you don't like it, you pull back out. There got to be expectations for that person who, and I know you're saying that. I understand you said that. But I just think we got to be clear to delineate what's that basic level of standards-based performance we're looking for, even from an apprentice.
I just submitted a question in the chat box, rhetorical, but it's one that's spinning around in my head with regard to the expectations in terms of teaching students or interacting with students or guiding students would be appropriate for a classroom apprentice. And it might be close to what TAs do. I just don't know.
I'm not sure we've gotten to that. Obviously, we would want more engagement from an apprentice in something that looks like instruction, whether it was working more with one-on-one with students and providing some intervention strategies led by the master teacher, maybe some small group work, maybe even some micro lessons that they could try on. Again, under strict supervision of that mentoring advanced teacher. I think dispositions is a way to, definitely a good way to get into it. Maybe even basic skills, knowledge, which they had accrued through doing their AA or 60 hours of their BA. It gets confusing to me sometimes when we start talking about it, and it is confusing. But if we're talking about these as entry points as opposed to what they are responsible for getting competent at during the time that they're in it, then what is that basic level related to InTask? And maybe dispositions is the way that we would say we could identify somebody as being a candidate for an apprenticeship. I like that.
Hank, would you mind if I rolled out 4 propositions / questions that I think we may have arrived at these?
Yeah, please.
So, and for everybody. So proposition / question number 1, that at least for the current work and the work moving forward, we are using the InTask framework. That's the language within which right now we're living. We're not suggesting that couldn't change, but at least for now, it's given us some guidance. And that includes both the standards themselves and the progression language that's in the document. So that's number 1. Number 2, as we look from apprentice across to license 3, we're looking at establishing a framework for progression. And does that mean all 10 standards from the start to the finish? Does that mean a subset building up to the full set? And that language again is framed out in the in-task document. So that's number 2. Number 3, are there a set of competencies that we would expect coming in the door that you could come in stone cold, exhibit no competencies at that point, or there's a set of expectations at that point that anyone we would expect to see that the first time you have contact with children, students. And then the 4th one is this question of the apprentice being the least complex and potentially a subset of the standards building up to license 3, which is the most complex, all 10 standards, but the apprentice is in that pathway. If they're not, that's something else. That's not the purview of this subcommittee. So Hank, those are just 4 that.
Yeah, I like those propositions. I would make one caveat is I wonder if clinical resident is set on the continuum where it would be, because it feels like to me the clinical resident is functioning more not as a teacher of record, obviously, but in terms of meeting competencies, they'd be a little bit closer to where a license 2 teacher would be, since they're going to jump straight to license 3 at the conclusion of their program. So I don't know how that fits in, but I'm not sure it's a straight progression across the way we have it set up right now. But certainly from apprentice 1, 2, 3, that makes sense. To me, I'm just talking for me, by the way.
I hear you.
Other comments on the propositions or additions?
Very clear. I like the way it's laid out. It captures a lot of our discussion today. Very good.
Hank, I don't have a lot of background with the in-task, and so I would just be curious from the group, does that proposition that we are using in-task, does that make sense? Is there broad support?
See one in the chat.
I think it's good to be starting with a framework, because I think we are just kind of throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks. And I think this gives us at least an idea of where to go. I was telling Andrew in our small group, I use the NTAS standards and the North Carolina teaching standards to build our classes to make sure throughout our program we've hit all of them. So one of the conversations we had in our group was the residency program is an abbreviated program of our full program. So the thought is, and Andrew kind of brought this up, is that we need to be thinking about who's going to be responsible for the NTAS standards that are not covered by the EPP, so to speak. Do you know what I mean? Because we've mapped them out through our whole program, but the residency programs in most instances are abbreviated, so they're not necessarily hitting all the standards.
Any other thoughts from the group? I love that we've come to a certain level of understanding across the group at this point. And I think that in-task helps us, even if we tweak those standards eventually to make them more unique to North Carolina and what we believe. That starting place seems like it really helps us get the work moving ahead and pretty universally accepted across the nation in terms of a set of standards and competencies for teachers that we're all trying to meet the EPPs. And that I would assume we would hold any other pathway responsible for as well if it's not a traditional EPP pathway.
Yeah, Hank, I can't remember whether I said this in the large group or the small group. Going back to Randy's question, InTask is in the DNA of the profession, and whether people would know, whether it's explicit enough that people know it at different points in their professional pathway. It's if you get back behind the curtain, the language of InTask is behind so many things that we've built, whether it's CAPE or National Board or whatever it might be.
I just have a question, since we're working on this, and I don't know if there is another subgroup that's covering it, but how is the influx of residency teachers being taken out in the field? Like, how are parents reacting, and how are, other staff and administrators, how are they feeling about this influx? I mean, I know that there's a shortage of people, but how are these candidates being received in the field? Is there any data on that?
This is Tom Tomlin. I don't have any kind of qualitative data on the perceptions. We do collect a first-year employer survey. We could, but this is the first year that we've had, what I would consider a representative sample of the state, because we've taken steps to kind of push districts to complete that. So we could start looking at that disaggregated by what we would consider traditional program completers and residency licensed teachers. Generally, we don't ask the employer to comment on a residency person until they've completed their program, because what the employer is commenting on is the level of preparation that the employee received, their perceptions of how well prepared they were to take on the challenges. And it seems a little, if we're getting at the impact of the preparation program, it doesn't make sense to ask before they've actually had the treatment. So that's where we are with that right now. We do in general know, just from some research we've done, that residency licensed teachers, well, we don't know about residency licensed teachers yet. Lateral entry, which was kind of comparable to residency, was less effective and persisted in the profession for a shorter amount of time on average than their traditionally prepared counterparts. But because residency came on full force July 1st, 2019, we don't have a lot of data on those folks as far as effectiveness data.
Diane, I saw you made a comment in the chat. Would you expand on that?
Yes, hi everyone, it's Diana here. I think I support this conversation we're having around InTask. I think it makes a lot more sense to align with things. As Man said, it's in the DNA. I think of that in terms of CAPE accreditation, other things that other folks might be familiar with. I think one of my concerns, though, is if we make this move, and this might link back to other conversations that we've had in this group about a broad evaluation model that would cover from pre-service to in-service. I wouldn't want to lean into InTask and then have to do the NESIS with the North Carolina Professional Teaching Standards in addition to it. I think if we're going to streamline, we should work towards streamlining it. And it seems like there's space for us to do that. And I just wanted to put that thought, concern, idea out there.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I'm not sure, maybe Tom can answer. I'm not sure where this would land in terms of the subcommittees. But I would assume that as a matter of defining the profession in North Carolina, what we're talking about with InTask would play out beyond license 3, and that teacher evaluation models that we would have in the future would map to the InTask language. I realize advanced roles and those kinds of things may branch out from it, but those core practices would always be there. Those core expectations about practice would be in any evaluation model.
This is Tom. I get very nervous talking about anything having to do with evaluation without Robert Sachs on the line, so I'm going to punt. But I mean, I do see what you're saying. If our licensure process is going to follow InTask standards, then why wouldn't our evaluation system also follow that? It seems quite logical to me, but yeah.
Yeah, a point that we in our breakout group that we talked about is the devil in these details is going to be in the operationalizing of the expectations. How, if you were to be in a classroom with a classroom teacher, how do we translate the language of the standards into expectations about practice? And I think Olivia said this earlier, you know, what that looks like in terms of who goes in the classroom with what instruments and does what observations or what analysis of practice to see if the practices are there, the standards are being met. And to Diana's point, and Tom, what you just said, we would see continuity of this across the profession. We wouldn't suddenly stop at some point and go adopt a new set of standards that are inconsistent with how we get them to license 4 in the first place.
This conversation has, I realize that we're about at the end of this session, but we are at a very good point in terms of a juncture, in terms of talking about giving some thought to streamlining our evaluation protocols, because this will please the ears of school administrators who have to deal with nieces across a variety of employment categories. So the more we can streamline and render some sanity to the system is going to be very much appreciated by our principals, superintendents, and also our State Board of Education.
That's great.
I agree with that up to one point. I would be concerned that if we became the subcommittee that created sanity in the system, we might get asked to be on every committee of the state. So I'm just...
I would make that motion. Very good work. Very good discussion today.
I know we're almost at the end, but I would like to ask some of our CAPE experts on the call right now. The InTask standards and those levels of progression, when you get to progression level 3, is that the expectation for exiting an EPP program, that you would have proficiency in all those standards, or do any of those move past into the profession with the candidate as they enter the profession as a full teacher of record? I'm wondering if there's already some extension competencies or standards baked into it, or if this is simply just for what's required by the time they complete the EPP program. Christina says the expectation is proficiency, but CAPE groups the standards into categories. Okay.
Yeah, I think that one might change. Nobody wants to admit to being a CAPE expert because we're not sure if we'll be an expert at the next review time, so we can't do that.
Yeah, I'm not claiming to be an expert, but I having just completed a visit last week, I can say that they don't look at the individual standards. So it's not standard 1, standard 2, standard 3. It's the learner and learning as a whole. So there's room in there, I guess. You could say, like, you know, we have to demonstrate that our candidates are proficient in the learner and learning overall. We don't have to demonstrate that they're proficient at standard 1 and standard 2 and standard, right?
Gotcha.
So I guess they're, you know, and if you're looking at that, like if you were to draw an analogy, say, with how niches works for in-practice teachers, it doesn't work the same way for pre-service teachers. But if you look at how it works for in-service teachers, they get a proficiency across a whole standard, not on each element of the standard. So there's room in there for somebody to, say, be still developing on standard, I don't know, 1E, but still have an overall proficient on standard 1. And so I would equate what CAPE looks at in the same way. Is that helpful?
That is very helpful. Thank you.
But please, I'm not claiming to be an expert on CAPE.
Well, I'll add this to what Christina just shared, is that when we had the last CAPE review that I had, we had to crosswalk in task to the North Carolina Professional Teaching Standards and then kind of justify that. So this kind of removes this gives us the opportunity to remove that middleman and just kind of align the assessments that we use within our EPPs or a new evaluation system, if we're going to dream big on that, directly to in-task. And I think, and provides a national standard, a national model for doing that. I remember it being challenging having to provide that crosswalk to our external peer reviewers. So again, simplification here would be helpful.
It's great.
Yeah, also,
Thank you.
Hank, going back to Tom's comment about evaluation, if there was continuity and coherency in the way we assess practice in the profession that began in the parts of the pathway we're talking about now, and that same logic extended out through their X number of years of practice, it makes so many things more, I don't want to use the word simple, sanity, I think Diana put it. It makes so many more things sane, because then we're looking at the impact of their practice on a continuum. Not they graduate or they leave an EPP or they finish clinical residency and they jump into a new evaluation system, and then they move over here and there's a way to frame evaluation over there, and then there's no continuity of data. And there's no continuity of data, there's no way you can have any kind of coherency and understand and professional progression. I'm so glad you said sanity. That kind of sanity actually, I think, would be beneficial to CAPE as well. Can we, you know, in many cases, CAPE is not the only place. We substitute volume of data as if volume meant clarity. More data is not necessarily clearer.
Agreed. Well, I know we're close to time here. Any final comments from the group? This has been a great discussion. I feel like we're somewhere, and that we can take something back to the fuller PEPSC Commission at this point that maybe helps lead the way for some other subcommittees who might be stuck at where we were before we got here. I think it's great.
Just a correction, not sign of relief, sigh of relief. I don't want it to get back to Pembroke that I can't spell.
Well, sane would be a sign of relief as
Oh,
well.
sane is the word of the hour.
Sign's not too bad either. Hank, are we ready to wrap it up?
I think so. Why don't you wrap us up?
Well, this has been fantastic. I mean, we're for a Monday morning and coming in ready to do this. This was outstanding. We will get the notes back out and keep everybody posted. Thank you so much for the energy and the perspective and the way we participate in the conversation today. This was great. At this point, I believe I can entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you.
Motion to adjourn.
And was Diana seconded?
Second, this is Randy.
Thank you, Randy. Without objection, we are adjourned.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good Monday afternoon.